How's it going, guys? Salvi from Mars1000. Today is October 26, 2020, and today we're gonna talk about Hurricane Zeta, which is currently approaching the Mexico coast at this time as a hurricane, as a Category 1 hurricane at 80 miles per hour. And it seems likely that this will make landfall sometime later during the week in the U.S. So let's begin by first taking a look at the current composition of Hurricane Zeta. And as you can see, there's a lot of convection with this storm surrounding the center of circulation. However, if we take a look at the long wave IR satellite imagery, we see that there's a lot of convection in this area and then some convection in this area. And what this means to me is that currently the center of circulation isn't really focused in one area just yet, because based off of what I've been seeing a little bit of rotation in this area where I'm seeing some clouds move towards the west while the clouds just south of this low pressure system move a little bit to the east, which means that there's currently two low pressure systems within this center of circulation, and what a strengthening hurricane needs is that we need to see a low pressure focus in one area. And as of right now, there seems to be a slight disconnect between two low pressure systems. However, I expect these two low pressure systems to eventually combine into one center of circulation for this storm to continue to strengthen. And I expect this convection in this area to overtake some of the convection in this area eventually, to where there will be one very strong low pressure system. And this means that the low pressure might jump into this area, move a little bit quicker towards the Mexico coast, and as a result strengthen even more than what it is right now. And but even with the small disconnect, this still is a strengthening storm, and it currently by National Hurricane Center is expected to make landfall possibly as 85 to 90 mile per hour hurricane. And I wouldn't rule out the possibility of Category 2 hurricane making landfall so just south of Cancun and right around the island of Cozumel, Mexico, because this storm is rapidly intensifying. And if we take a look at the current water temperatures, it's over very warm 85-degree water. It may be late October. However, during in this area, it's usually the water, not only it's warm all year round, but it had so much time over the summer, which was very recent. Last month was September, that this is able to retain its heat even as we head into the cooler months of October and going into November. So this definitely has Hurricane Zeta definitely has a lot of fuel to work with as it moves on to the Mexico coast. And if we take a look at the upper ocean heat content as well, we see that it's not only that the water is warm on the upper surface of the ocean, but if we go down with depth, there's still a lot of warm water for this storm to work with. And since it's moving relatively fast, it won't really absorb a lot of that warmer water that's all the way below the surface, because the water on the top of the sea surface is more than enough to strengthen this, and it's rapidly strengthening as a result of that. If you take a look at the current wind shear, you see that while you can't see a storm currently on the GFS because I'm showing the United States map, you see that for the most part the wind shear in this area is second to none, with very little wind shear in this area. There was a little bit wind shear earlier during the week as a result of this upper level trough that was moving through the east coast. However, that upper level trough moved a little bit further to the east, to a point where this storm has a little bit of an open lane to continue to strengthen without any sort of wind shear disrupting it. So this is expected to rapidly intensify going before landfall. But thankfully, the good news is that this won't have a lot of time before to strengthen as it heads towards the Mexico coast, because it's moving quite at a steady pace. Let me check the Let me check the forecast track to see how it's moving at 10 miles per hour, which is about an average speed for a hurricane. However, the storm's eye isn't very far off from the Mexico coast, so it only has a certain amount of time before it hits land and then begins weakening. However, for Mexico, this still should be a very impactful storm. There's a Category 1 hurricane. Potentially could be a high-end Category 1 or low-end Category 2 hurricane once it makes landfall in Mexico. So definitely prepare if you're along Mexico coast, especially since you guys dealt with Hurricane Delta, which was nearly a Category 3 hurricane just a month ago, just less than a month ago. So definitely prepare along Mexico and make sure to stay safe and stay out of harm's way, stay indoors, and just make sure to prepare in Mexico, because Category 1 and Category 2 hurricanes are definitely not something you want to mess around with. So in terms of the future of this storm, so your first question might be the strength going forward with the storm. So like I said, the strength in the short-term future is expected to continue to strengthen. I would say maybe to a high-end Category 1 or low-end Category 2 hurricane, maybe 90 to 95 miles per hour when it makes landfall. And then it will weaken as it goes over Mexico, which is expected. It's going to lose contact with the warm upper ocean heat water that's in the Caribbean Sea, and it won't have enough fuel to continue to strengthen, and the friction of the land will weaken those winds as the eye moves over Mexico. However, after that, you might be asking what is the strength forecast for that, and I expect this to redevelop. I expect it to weaken as it goes over land, probably back to a tropical storm as it heads off the coast of Mexico. But then I expect to re-strengthen for several reasons. One is that the wind shear will be, for the most part, very light in this area, and it will have a decent amount of time without any sort of wind shear that'll affect it, and that would otherwise disrupt it if the wind shear was there. So the lack of wind shear, along with water temperatures that aren't insanely warm, but still warm enough for hurricane development, and along with so I expect this to strengthen. However, I think the Achilles heel for Zeta going into the future will be the dry air that could potentially hinder it from developing or rapidly intensifying in the Gulf of Mexico. Because if you take a look at the GFS model, you see that there's just a lot of dry air over the Gulf of Mexico. And while Hurricane Zeta does a good job of pushing a lot of that dry air further up north, and pretty much and the outer bands and the outflow of this storm pushing a lot of that dry air away from the center of circulation, there still will be just enough dry air to where it could potentially hinder it a little bit, especially on the western side of this storm, where you see that the western side of this storm is nowhere near as moist as the eastern side of this storm, and that should keep its strengthening at a minimum, I expect, because when a hurricane is asymmetrical, that isn't at all very good news. Like I said, it isn't a ton of dry air, and the bad news is that there isn't a ton of wind shear to push that dry air into the center of circulation. However, I think it will be enough to where it won't strengthen that much as it heads north. However, again, like any minuscule changes with the forecast with the dry air could change everything, in my opinion, because if there isn't a lot of dry air and this dry air does very little of the storm, there is that possibility that I wouldn't say rapidly strengthens, because the water temperatures in the Gulf aren't warm enough for a rapidly intensifying storm, especially with the upper ocean heat content very limited at this point in the fall. However, I could see a gradual strengthening if everything goes right for Zeta, where we could see a Category 2 hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico to maybe a Category 3, who knows, but I do expect this dry air to keep the strengthening at a minimum, and eventually that dry air will catch up to Zeta, because as this moves further and further north to the Gulf, it won't only deal with the stronger dry air that's going to be towards the western side of this storm, where the storm will look completely asymmetrical going into along the coast, but it will also deal with slightly cooler waters going into the North Gulf of Mexico, where we start to see the 70-degree water temperatures over the Gulf of Mexico since there's been a lot of troughs as a result of fall and winter approaching, and we've seen a lot of dips in the jet stream, bringing Arctic air down towards the southeast. We're seeing the water temperatures begin to cool down during the fall, and as a result, we're seeing lower water temperatures throughout the northern Gulf of Mexico, and this might put its strengthening at a minimum going into Louisiana. However, there's still that possibility this could still be strengthening going into the Gulf, because the GFS is still favoring it, and I suspect that it might get a little bit of its strengthening from this baroclinic influence from this extratropical cyclone over Texas that's currently expected to bring over a foot of snow through New Mexico and Kansas. And I expect the cool air from the backside of this extratropical cyclone to maybe enhance some of the storm's strength. And while this may not be a hurricane going into landfall, it still could be strengthening because the wind field will expand, and we could see baroclinic influences enhance the storm's strength overall and expand the storm's wind field, which definitely isn't something we want to see, because when the wind field expands, there's a larger fetch. The wind has larger fetch over water to bring bigger storm surge along the Gulf of Mexico, which is an area that's very vulnerable to storm surge, especially after all the hurricanes we saw this hurricane season. So that's definitely a worry if this extratropical cyclone brings a strong baroclinic influence where it could expand the storm, and it could slightly weaken it, strengthen it at that. However, again, I don't expect major strengthening or weakening as it heads towards the Gulf of Mexico, because for one thing, for a storm to rapidly intensify, it usually needs to be fully tropical and not get any baroclinic influences, unless it's like an extremely strong baroclinic influence like it was with Hurricane Sandy, where we saw a cold front merge with Hurricane Sandy. Then it's unlikely that this will rapidly strengthen, and that seems unlikely at this point, that the extratropical cyclone and hurricane will merge together. So counting that out of the realm of possibilities, it doesn't seem likely this will gradually strengthen. However, I don't see this gradually or rapidly weakening either, because again, it will still have some baroclinic influence that will keep the storm alive despite the dry air that may be behind it. So all in all, I expect strengthening towards the first half when it's in the Gulf, but towards the second half, once it deals with more wind shear, more dry air, and cooler waters, the strengthening should be kept at a minimum, and I expect probably somewhere around a Category 1 hurricane making landfall somewhere in the Gulf. This could all change because, again, we're still about 3 days out, 3 to 2 days out from landfall around the Gulf Coast. So we definitely have to see if this has a strong baroclinic influence on the storm, or if this storm has a little bit more time over water, which could make a world of difference, and how much dry air there is. However, at this point, I expect potentially strengthening up to a Category 2 in the Gulf, and then maybe weakening as it heads towards the Gulf Coast. So definitely keep that in mind. I expect Category 1 and along Gulf. So if you're along Gulf Coast, definitely prepare as if a Category 1 hurricane is headed your way. And now in terms of the track of this storm, so if we take a look at the current National Hurricane Center track of this storm, you see that it's expected to make landfall somewhere just south of Cancun, and then we have a wide array of possibilities which between the cone, which extends from the panhandle of Florida all the way to the middle coast of Louisiana. However, this storm However, there isn't a huge realm of possibilities. Again, we're only forecasting 3 days out, so it becomes a little bit more certain where this storm will make landfall. And for the most part, I don't expect this storm to have any major shifts in the forecast, especially when we're only about 3 days out from landfall. And the reason why I don't expect a major shift in the forecast is because by the time we hit Wednesday, there's going to be a clear steering current that's going to steer the storm towards the north and east, and that's going to be this extra tropical cyclone, like I showed you like I showed you guys earlier during the video, where if we take a look at the geopotential height anomaly for this storm, we're seeing a ridge that's going to steer it towards the west, and then we're seeing a big dip in the jet stream over New Mexico, Texas, and when we're talking about a jet stream that's going to be close to a tropical cyclone, it's very certain where the storm will go because it will just ride the jet stream, and it's unlikely that it'll make any major shifts in the forecast. However, what could change the track potentially again could be the speed of this trough. If it moves a little bit faster to the east, then I would expect maybe more of a eastward track where the panhandle gets more of the impacts in Alabama. However, if this moves a little bit more slower, definitely expect more of a westward track, aiming more towards Louisiana and Mississippi, and avoiding Texas and Alabama for the most part in terms of direct impacts. If we take a look at the wind anomaly, however, I wouldn't pay attention to the track too much because this will have a pretty large wind field, especially as it heads along the coast, and will encounter this extra tropical cyclone that will pretty much pretty much expand its wind field as it heads along the coast. Because if we take a look at landfall point, where it's not at around 982 millibars, you see that those winds extend all the way to a panhandle of Florida, and the storm will move very rapidly to the east. So while the storm may be well inland by the time it's just north of the Florida panhandle, we're still going to see strong winds on the backside of this storm if it does, as you could see here, where we're seeing still the strong winds from the back side of the storm in the south side, to where the Florida panhandle is experiencing tropical storm force impacts. And even going well beyond the Gulf Coast, we see it's definitely something to watch, even going towards the Carolinas, because we're going to see big dip in the trough combined with a tropical hurricane, and that usually brings very windy conditions when you combine the two together. And if we move even further, the northeast, especially along the coast, should potentially be watching for some maybe coastal flooding or rough surf as a result of this trough combining with the tropical storm. So definitely watch along the southeast, and don't underestimate this just because it's inland, because you could experience windy conditions even when landfall is even well after landfall. So definitely keep that in mind along the east coast and southeast. And so now that we know that the track isn't going to shift, have any major shifts in the forecast, let's predict the current rainfall forecast. And the good news is that this storm will move relatively fast as it heads along coast, obviously because of the dip in the jet stream. So a decent amount of rain is expected. So not a crazy amount of rain is expected. And also there's going to be a lot of dry air that's going to train it as it heads towards the coast, as a result of this trough that's just going to be behind it. So there won't be a ton of rain like you'd experience with Laura or Hurricane Sally. However, there still will be a decent amount where we could see 4 to 6 inches around New Orleans. And this rain extends even further inland, where the northeast could experience 2 to 4 inches of rain over the next 5 days. So definitely keep that in mind along the Gulf Coast and going inland. And in terms of the storm surge forecasts, like I said, the wind field will likely expand as it heads towards the coast, which means that the storm surge threat also increases along the Gulf Coast, where we could see 4 to 6 feet of storm surge along the Mississippi and Gulf and Louisiana coast. Lake Pontchartrain 2 to 4 feet, which isn't anything major. However, if you're along low-lying areas, that's definitely something to keep in mind. And even going as far east as Yankeetown in Florida, where you could experience 1 to 3 feet of storm surge as a result of this large wind field of this storm. So keep that in mind and make sure to prepare along the Gulf Coast. But anyways, guys, I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe for more content. Make sure to like if you like this video. And I hope you guys have a great day, good evening, whenever you're watching this. So I hope you guys stay safe along the Gulf Coast and have a nice day.